In the year 1861, the United States of America experienced a division between the North and the South that separated the country into two individual nations. This division was a result of 7 slave states in the South seceding from the United States after Abraham Lincoln won the presidential election of 1860. Now, some of you might be wondering, why did the South secede because Lincoln was elected president? Well, allow me to fill you in. These southern states relied on the use of slaves to economically prosper, and Abraham Lincoln was a Republican who pledged a policy of terminating slavery in these southern territories. With the foundation of their economic wealth at jeopardy, the South went on to form their own nation where they could continue to practice slavery, otherwise known as the Confederate States of America. This sequence of events ultimately posed our country with the question of what kind of nation it would go on to exist as. An indivisible nation where all men were created with an equal right to liberty, or a dissolvable confederation of sovereign states that practiced slavery. As the United States continued to be divided into 2 separate nations, there was only one way to answer this question: war. As we all know from the history courses we have taken throughout our education, the North would ultimately go on to win this war in 1865, preserving the United States as one nation once again and ending the institution of slavery. However, my goal here today is to explain to you why exactly the North was able to defeat the South in the Civil War. Arguably the greatest factor that attributed to the Union's victory of this war was their economy. The Civil War was a series of battles that was highly influenced by each nation's economic forces. During this time, the North had a more industrial-based economy, which was superior to the agricultural-based economy that was practiced in the South. The North's industrial-based economy consisted of many factories that allowed them to manufacture and produce products from firearms to clothing at a much more efficient rate than the South's agricultural-based economy was capable of doing. This advantage can be understood when analyzing some statistics. According to Benjamin T. Arrington of National Park Services, the North produced 3,200 firearms for every 100 firearms that the South produced. The North's ability to produce numerous industries of supplies, including weapons, leather, iron, and textiles, was an immense advantage that they had over the South, who for the majority relied on sales from their agriculture to economically survive the war. Not only was the North more equipped to manufacture these supplies for their troops, but they also had the advantage of transporting them at a very efficient rate. Another influential factor during this war was industrial output, and northern transportation industries prospered during this time, particularly in railroads. The North's remarkable amount of railroad tracks allowed them to transport soldiers and supplies at a rate that the South simply did not have the ability to complete. According to CivilWar.org, it is recorded that the North constructed 22,000 miles of railroad tracks in their territory compared to the lesser 9,500 miles of railroad tracks that were constructed in the South. Historian John P. Hankey states that the South put themselves in a tremendous disadvantage by not realizing the importance of railroad transportation during this war. In contrast, the North began laying railroad tracks very early in the war, beginning with President Abraham Lincoln's signing of the Pacific Railway Act in 1862, which authorized the construction of the United States' first transcontinental railroad. While the North's industrial economy gave them an advantage in economic production, another resource that the Union had an advantage in was their population. Just like any war, or any altercation for that matter, the amount of people you have fighting on your side is a factor that attributes to your ability to be victorious. According to History on the Net, the North had a population of approximately 22 million people fighting against the smaller 9 million people who populated the South. PBS recorded that of these populations, 2.1 million Northerners were mobilized to fight for the Union Army, nearly doubling the Confederate Army that consisted of just a little over 1 million Southerners. This advantage gave rise to the 3-to-1 ratio of Confederate soldier deaths to Union soldier deaths. The North's large population also helped the Union's economic efforts because they had a great number of citizens working in the factories that produced the resources for the troops. Lastly, the North's population was very advantageous due to the contributions of contraband. Living Contraband states that contraband was the term used to describe slaves that had fled the South and crossed over to the Union lines as the war progressed. Once they had crossed the Union lines, they were classified as property that the Union constituted would not be returned to the South. These freed slaves added to the population of the North helped the Union's efforts by manufacturing war supplies for a wage and some were even mobilized to fight in the Union Army. Contraband not only brought greater value to the population of the North, but also damaged the South's economic stability by eliminating the amount of slaves present in the South that the Confederacy was dependent on to produce goods. The Union's victory over the Confederacy in the Civil War determined the nation that the United States of America would exist as in the future. The North's industrial economy gave rise to efficient, superior methods of manufacture and transport that the South was simply unable to compete with. When combining the North's productive economy with their population of more than double the size of their competitors, it was inevitable that the North would ultimately defeat the South in the Civil War, reuniting our country as the indivisible nation that it continues to be.
When Johnny comes marching home again, hurrah, hurrah, we'll give him a hearty welcome then, hurrah.